So we've drilled our holes. Now we're going to have a look at tapping them. We can tap them much the same way using a cam cycle as we did when we drilled them. So for this we're going to use a G84 can cycle. Similar to the other can cycles we use for drilling, we have the option of adding an X and Y coordinate here. This is the position of our first hole that we wish to tap. The Z value defines how deep we wish our thread to go. Bear in mind, most taps have a small lead in on the front of the tap. This has to be allowed for when we're deciding how deep we want our tap to go into the material. The R value is the retract value, how far we wish the tap to remove from the material before we wrap it to our next hole. The Q value is an interesting one. With the Q value we can peck tap. This always looks very impressive, but before we can peck tap we have to change the G code to G84.2. This allows us to be able to peck with our tap. This means the tap will cut a thread to a certain point, and then reverse out of the material, and then keep repeating the process until the full length of thread is complete. This is great for clearing out swarf on stubborn holes where the tap keeps breaking. So the Q value is the distance of each peck. The F value is not a feed rate in this case. We use it to define the pitch of the thread that we wish to cut. For this operation, I'm going to use an M5 tap to machine a metric coarse thread in our 4.2mm holes. So the pitch for this is 0.8mm. This is what we set our F value to. Now we're going to have a look at how we use the G84 rigid tapping cycle within a program. The first thing we need to do is tell the machine that we're not using a feed rate of millimeters per minute. Since F now equals pitch and not feed rate, we need to tell the machine that we're using millimeters per revolution and not millimeters per minute. We do this by adding a G95 in the program. On some machines and control systems, this is not needed to add this G95, but it doesn't do any harm to do it anyway as a safety precaution. So G95 is the G code that tells the machine we're going to be using the feed per revolution of the spindle. G94 puts the machine back into millimeters per minute mode. Before the end of the tapping sequence, I like to switch back to the G94 millimeters per minute mode. This is so this block can run on its own, and if we have to pop back into the program and re-tap these holes, the machine will be in the right mode next time we do a tool change. So let's have a look at this block of code. G84 is our rigid tapping cycle mode. Z minus 12mm is the depth we wish our tap to machine to. Taking our billet as 10mm thick, we are going 2mm past the outside of the material, so we're tapping through the component. R5.0 is our retract value. This brings the tap 5mm above the face of the component after each tapped hole. And finally, F0.8 is got to be the same as the pitch of the thread that we are cutting. Now, setting our retract value at 5mm is all good for cycle times, but what happens if we come across our clamp again? Well, the G98 and the G99 values still work when we're doing a tapping cycle, so if we need to hop back up a little bit higher to our original rapid length of Z15mm, we can do this by using a G98 or a G99 command. For more information on the use of these G codes, refer back to our G81 drilling cycle lesson. So if the hole we are tapping is a deep hole, or if we're using a soft material such as aluminium that keeps clogging up the tap and breaking it, we can use a peck tapping cycle by using a G84.2 instead of a G84. This allows us to use a Q value so we can set the peck depth. By setting our pecking depth at 3mm, the machine will cut 3mm of thread, reverse the spindle and come back up to our defined R value. In our case, it's 5mm above the surface of the material. And then wrap it back down just before the thread and start cutting the next 3mm of thread. It will repeat this until the full length of thread has been cut. So far in this lesson, we've covered cutting a right-hand thread, but what happens if we need to cut a left-hand? Well, for that, we use the G-code G84. Everything else remains exactly the same as I have taught on this lesson. In this section, I covered all the ways we can tap a hole on a CNC milling machine or a CNC router